Hi, our group is Oppression and Privilege Y, and this is our layout. We're going to go over the background of the Seminal Study, as long as the methods, why is it a Seminal Study, and as well as the take-home message. My name is Grace Terrell, and I will be going over the background of our Seminal Study today. In order to look into our Seminal Study and what it is and how it plays with and talks about anti-racism and white privilege, we need to understand first the definitions of anti-racism and white privilege. So anti-racism can be best defined as any theory and or practice, whether it is political or personal, that seeks to challenge, eliminate, or reduce manifestations of racism in society. As well as this, white privilege is an unconscious advantage given to a person on the basis of being white. Throughout history and around the world, the anti-racist movement has served many purposes. One, to reduce racism around the world and the incidences, and also to try to have everyone to foster a sort of anti-racist attitude in order to try and reduce the amount of racially motivated acts seen. Anti-racism does have a very long history around the world. It is seen in many of the historical events that involve racism. So in this, the opposition of racism, the anti-apartheid in South Africa, the civil rights movement in the United States, and more recently it can be seen with the Black Lives Matter movement. Along with this, white privilege is present in many everyday activities and is very unconscious, and can silently be an oppressor, as it is not very seen to the naked eye and more or less needs to be examined to understand why. And as talked about in our article and our study, being able to become anti-racist does require the acknowledgement of one's privilege, and this white privilege, and the unconscious racism that does come with that privilege. Throughout the article, it talks about these women that have to come to terms with their white privilege and how that give them biases and some sort of racism so that they can then become anti-racist.
Hi, my name is Ryan Thomas, and I will be talking about the methods of this study. First, I will start by talking about the participants that took place in the Seminal Study. To start, there were 21 white women against racism members who were involved in this study through observations in group meetings, private interviews, or both. Of the pool of interviewees that took place, they could have came from two locations, specifically two colleges. One was a metropolitan located college that had roughly 30,000 people, and the other college was a state-funded college that had roughly 15,000 people. Of that pool, there were 17 white women interviewees that consisted of 11 students, 4 campus staff members, and 2 faculty members. The interviewees ranged from 19 to 51 years old with an average age of 30 years old. The sexual preferences of those interviewees were 1 lesbian, 1 homosexual, 2 people who identified as queer, and 13 heterosexuals. Next, I will be talking about the data collection and analysis for the Seminal Study. Field notes were taken on 40 different group meetings, each lasting 1.5 hours, which were used and typed for coding. Semi-structured interviews, which ranged from 1 to 3 hours, were also taped for coding. The coding that was utilized in this Seminal Study was the N6 version 6.0. The N6 version 6.0 coding allows for systematic organization of text for complex data and management. The note-taking for these sessions utilized the ground theory methodology. The ground theory methodology allows for open coding, axial coding, and selective coding. Open coding first takes all of the raw data and gives names, categorizes basic concepts, patterns, and themes. We then move on to axial coding, which involves main categories of data and then establishes relationships between the open coding. Finally, we go to selective coding, which integrates the categories into a storyline, which then becomes a narration, which people can then use. Finally, intercoder reliability of 88.2% between the two coders was calculating using N6 for 7 out of the 14 interviews and a 33% field no.
So first, some Seminal Study information. The members that were in the study were a part of a weekly discussion group that were observed and some were later interviewed. The participants were 21 WWAR, or White Women Against Racism members from 2 Midwestern universities in the United States. The individuals were observed during their weekly meetings, which lasted roughly 1.5 hours, and then some were pulled aside later on for private interviews. These interviews ranged from 1 to 3 hours in length. Now some information about the study. According to the article, this research examined White Women Against Racism group members' experiences with reflecting on white racial identity, confronting white privilege, and taking anti-racist action for social change. As mentioned before, there was a total of 21 members in the group. This included students, faculty, and professors. The only requirements to be in the group were that you were female and white. The group met weekly and had the following 5 goals for their discussions. 1. To bring white women together to do self-work around racism, privilege, and responsibility for helping affect change. 2. To develop anti-oppression skills in our personal and professional lives by facing, examining, and decreasing our own racism. Number 3. To provide support to each other and those doing anti-oppression work. For white people, work on racism can trigger discomfort, fear, and defensiveness. Number 4. To provide practical and emotional allies to women of color. And 5. To provide models for dialogue. In the end, all but one of the 21 members identified themselves as racist, and these 20 that identified themselves this way noted that the admittance of being racist had helped them move forward and improve themselves. And what makes this a seminal study? A seminal study presents an idea that is influential, of high importance, and often controversial. This study would fit into the category of being a seminal study because it brings to light issues of racism and prejudice, which are issues of great importance but can also be points of controversy. I believe it is critical to understand white privilege and acknowledge our own racism and racial prejudices in order to progress in becoming anti-racist.
Hi, my name is Beth Maloney, and I will be doing the take-home message for our presentation. Kim A. Case's Discovering the Privilege of Whiteness seminal study explained the importance of recognizing our own white privilege and how that and racism affects our daily lives. As study participant Beth described, committing to anti-racism is similar to committing to an Alcoholics Anonymous program. In order to work against a lifetime of privilege, we need to put in constant work, even if we feel we no longer have those racial biases, and even when we feel especially uncomfortable. The most important step is admitting our own racism and racial biases. Most participants in the study believe that in order to commit fully to being anti-racist, we have to admit first to our own racism. This helps us open up better to conversations about racism, both with other white people and with people of color. This can also help lower the potential discomfort or conflict that may come after speaking out against racist comments. Participants in the study explained that oftentimes they would not speak up because they were afraid of potential backlash and conflict, especially with older people and men who are family members. I know that I have purposefully not spoken up about racist remarks from my parents because I didn't want to fight and I was tired. However, like study participants and other white people, I know that this exemplifies my continued need to work on myself. Being tired or afraid of conflict is not a good enough reason for any of us to become complacent. Popular social media hashtags like silence is violence show that by saying nothing, we perpetuate racist ideals and allow racism to continue to have a home in our homes. Because of our white privilege, we are able to ignore these racist comments because it would be more uncomfortable to deal with them than to let them go unnoticed. Our fear of ostracism overcomes our hatred of racism. This study exemplifies that our discomfort from conflict is marginal compared to the discomfort of people of color face when racist remarks are made. Moreover, participants explain that when they feel they are being complacent, they remind themselves of similar struggles. Since all subjects were female, they were able to relate some people of color's struggles to sexism, while a smaller amount could relate through homophobia and/or classism. Thinking about someone not sticking up for women in face of sexist comments is hard to stomach. Relating our experiences helps us empathize with others and want to work against our own discomfort. Far and wide, the most important thing about this seminal study is to speak up and to pass it on. As long as we continue to work on ourselves and our own racial biases, and we continue to foster that attitude in other people, we can help combat racism and oppression.